The restaurant's Christmas lights blurred through tears she refused to let fall. 7 rejections in 14 days had taught Elena Martinez one thing. Hope was a dangerous luxury she could no longer afford. But tonight, watching the broken millionaire at table 12 check his phone with trembling hands, something inside her shattered and rebuilt itself all at once. Before we dive into this incredible journey of love and redemption, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You'll want to follow this story to the very end. Trust me, what happens next will absolutely change how you see love forever. It was Christmas Eve in Chicago, and Bellissimo restaurant pulsed with laughter and clinking glasses. Couples leaned across candlelit tables, sharing stolen kisses and whispered promises. But at table 12, Alexander Pierce sat alone, his designer suit looking more like armor than celebration. His eyes kept darting to his phone. 9:47 p.m. Nearly 2 hours of waiting. 2 hours of watching the door, of making excuses to himself, of dying slowly inside. Elena had been watching him since he arrived at 8 o'clock sharp. She'd seen him adjust the silverware 6 times, smooth down his tie repeatedly, rehearse smiles he'd never get to use. She'd witnessed the hope drain from his face with each passing minute, replaced by something far worse than anger, resignation. Still no show? Elena approached his table, her voice gentle despite the chaos of the dinner rush around them. Alexander looked up, and Elena caught her breath. His eyes were the clearest blue she'd ever seen, but they held such profound sadness that her heart clenched involuntarily. "I think that's my answer," he said, attempting a smile that absolutely broke her heart. "7th time's the charm, right? Except backwards." 7th? Elena couldn't hide her shock. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down without invitation. Her manager would kill her for this. But some moments mattered more than rules. Someone stood you up 7 times? 7 different someones in 2 weeks. Alexander laughed bitterly. "I'm either cursed or completely unlovable. Haven't decided which yet." Elena studied him, really studied him. Expensive watch, perfect haircut, custom-tailored suit. This was a man who had everything money could buy but was clearly starving for something it couldn't. And in that moment, Elena saw herself reflected in his loneliness. A girl who worked 3 shifts to support her family, who came home too exhausted to date, who'd convinced herself that sacrificing her own happiness was the same as being strong. "Want to know what I think?" Elena leaned forward, her dark eyes fierce with sudden determination. "I think anyone who leaves you waiting on Christmas Eve is an idiot who doesn't deserve a single second of your time." "You don't know me," Alexander said quietly. "I know you've been here for almost 2 hours and haven't once been rude to staff, even though you're clearly dying inside. I know you've ordered water 4 times, just to avoid sitting here without ordering anything. I know you adjusted that fork 6 times because you wanted everything perfect for someone who couldn't be bothered to send a text." Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. "And I know that kind of hope, that kind of trying, that's not something unlovable people do. That's what brave people do." Alexander stared at her like she'd just spoken a language he'd forgotten existed. "Who are you?" "Elena Martinez, professional server and apparently part-time therapist." She grinned, and something shifted in the air between them. "And you're going to order the most expensive thing on this menu? Eat until you can't move, and stop looking at that door like it holds all the answers to your life. Deal?" For the first time that night, maybe the first time in weeks, Alexander laughed genuinely. Deal. What Elena didn't know was that this single act of kindness would unravel everything she thought she knew about love, about herself, and about the walls she'd built around her heart. Over the next hour, something extraordinary happened. Elena should have been working, should have been taking care of her other tables, but every time she tried to leave, Alexander would say something that made her laugh, or ask a question that made her think, and she'd find herself sliding back into that chair across from him. "So what's your story?" Alexander asked as she brought him dessert tiramisu she'd ordered, even though he insisted he was full. "Why is someone like you spending Christmas Eve serving strangers instead of out there living?" Elena's smile faltered just slightly. Someone like me? Someone who notices people. Really notices them. Alexander's gaze was steady, intense, in a way that made Elena feel exposed. That's rare. Elena looked down at her hands worn from years of washing dishes, serving food, cleaning up other people's messes. My dad died 6 years ago. Heart attack. Sudden. No warning. He was the manager here. Actually, this restaurant was his dream. She gestured around them. Mom fell apart. My sister Sophia was 12. Needed someone to hold things together. So I held things together. And who holds you together? Alexander asked softly. The question hit Elena like a physical blow. No one had ever asked her that. No one had ever thought to ask her that. I don't need holding together, she said automatically. But her voice cracked on the last word. Everyone needs holding together sometimes, Alexander said. Even the strong ones. Especially the strong ones. Elena felt tears burning her eyes and blinked them back furiously. You're a stranger. I don't even know your last name. Why am I telling you this? Because sometimes strangers are safer than people who know us, Alexander said. They don't have expectations. They just listen. And listen, he did. For another 30 minutes, Elena found herself spilling stories she'd never told anyone. About the exhaustion of working 60-hour weeks. About the loneliness of watching everyone around her fall in love while she fell into bed too tired to dream. About the guilt of wanting more when her family needed her to want less. Can I tell you something crazy? Alexander said when she finally paused for breath. Please do. I've monopolized this entire conversation. This, Alexander gestured between them. Sitting here with you. Listening to you. This is the best date I've had in 5 years. Elena's heart stuttered. This isn't a date, isn't it? Alexander's smile was soft, wondering. We've been talking for over an hour. You've made me laugh more than anyone has in months. I've told you things I don't tell people I've known for years. If this isn't a date, what is it? It's... Elena searched for words and found none. Because he was right. Somewhere between the tears and the laughter and the brutal honesty, this had become something that terrified her. I close at 11, she heard herself say. There's a diner 3 blocks from here that's open all night. They have the best apple pie in Chicago. Alexander's entire face transformed. Are you asking me on a date, Elena Martinez? I'm suggesting pie, Elena said. But she was smiling. Don't make it weird. Too late, Alexander said. It's already weird. And perfect. Weirdly perfect. At 11:15, Elena walked out of Bellissimo with her coat buttoned wrong and her heart beating too fast. Alexander was waiting outside, stamping his feet against the cold, and when he saw her, his smile could have lit the entire city. The diner was called Rosie's, and it smelled like coffee and cinnamon and every warm memory Elena had of her father. They slid into a cracked vinyl booth, and Alexander ordered 2 slices of apple pie without looking at the menu. So Alexander Pierce, Elena said, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. Your turn. Tell me something real. Something real? Alexander considered this. Okay. I'm 34 years old. I run a software company that's worth more money than I know what to do with. I work 16-hour days because work is easier than going home to an empty apartment. And I've been on 42 first dates in the last year because I'm desperate to feel something other than successful and alone. The rawness in his voice made Elena ache. 42? 42 disasters. Women who want my money, or my connections, or just something to brag about on social media. Not one of them asked me how I actually was. Not one of them noticed when I was faking a smile. He looked at her directly. You noticed. Of course I noticed, Elena said softly. You were dying right in front of me, and you cared enough to sit down. Alexander reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. Offering, not taking. Why? Elena looked at his hand, at the space between them that felt both infinite and microscopic. Because I know what it's like to be invisible. To be in a room full of people and feel completely alone. And I thought maybe for once, someone shouldn't have to feel that way. especially not on Christmas Eve. Alexander's fingers closed the distance, touching hers so gently it felt like a question. I'm really glad Madison stood me up. Elena laughed through tears. She didn't remember starting to cry. That might be the saddest and sweetest thing anyone's ever said to me. They stayed at Rosie's until 3 in the morning. The pie got cold. The coffee got refilled 5 times. And somewhere between talking about their favorite books and arguing about whether Chicago or New York had better pizza, something fundamental shifted in both their worlds. When Alexander finally drove Elena home to a modest apartment in a neighborhood his GPS marked as concerning, he walked her to her door like they were living in an old movie. "Can I see you again?" he asked. And there was nothing practiced about it, nothing smooth, just desperate hope wrapped in vulnerability. "I work tomorrow night," Elena said. "I'll come to the restaurant." "Alexander, I'm working. I can't just sit and talk to you." "Then I'll sit at a table and watch you work," Alexander said seriously. "I don't care. I just want to see you again." Elena felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been locked tight for 6 years. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But Elena didn't pull away. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the same time. "Merry Christmas, Elena Martinez," Alexander breathed against her mouth. "Merry Christmas, Alexander Pierce." Inside her apartment, Elena found her mother and sister waiting up, pretending to watch TV. "It's 3 in the morning, her mother Rosa said, trying to sound stern and failing completely. "I know," Elena said, touching her lips where she could still feel Alexander's kiss. 14-year-old Sophia squealed. "You met someone. I can see it on your face. Who is he? What does he do? Is he cute? When can we meet him?" "His name is Alexander. He's—" Elena paused, realizing she didn't know how to explain what had just happened. "He's someone special." "Special how?" Rosa asked gently. Elena thought about Alexander sitting alone at that table, about the way he'd listened to her like every word mattered, about how natural it had felt to hold his hand. "Special like I forgot I could feel this way," she said finally. "Special like maybe I don't have to choose between taking care of everyone else and taking care of myself." Rosa stood and pulled Elena into a hug. "Your father would tell you that you deserve this, that you've always deserved this." "I know," Elena whispered into her mother's shoulder. "I think I'm starting to believe it." The next night, Alexander kept his promise. He showed up at Bellissimo at 6 p.m. and took a table in Elena's section. When she came over to take his order, he handed her a single, red rose. "You can't give me flowers while I'm working," she hissed, but she was blushing furiously. "Watch me," Alexander said with a grin. For 3 hours, he sat there, ordering appetizers he barely touched, just so Elena would have to keep coming back to his table. Between serving other customers, she'd steal 30-second conversations with him. He told her about the book he was reading. She told him about Sophia's upcoming dance recital. It was absurd and perfect, and every other server was giving her knowing looks. "Your boyfriend is really bad at pretending to eat," her coworker, Marcus, whispered as they passed in the kitchen. "He's not my boyfriend," Elena protested. "Girl, he's been staring at you for 3 hours like you hung the moon. He's definitely your boyfriend." When Elena's shift ended, Alexander was waiting outside again. This time, he had coffee from her favorite place, a small Cuban cafe 3 miles away. "How did you know?" Elena asked, accepting the cup that smelled like home. "I asked around," Alexander said simply. "I wanted to get it right." "You asked around? Who did you ask?" "I may have called every coffee shop in a 5-mile radius until I found one where the owner said, 'Oh, Elena Martinez? That angel who always tips even though she shouldn't? She loves our café con leche.'" Elena stared at him. "You're crazy." "I'm motivated," Alexander corrected. "There's a difference." He took her free hand. "Elena, I haven't stopped thinking about you for 1 second since last night. Is that crazy? Maybe. But I don't care. I'm too old to play games or pretend I don't feel what I feel. And what do you feel? Elena's voice barely rose above a whisper. Like I've been waiting my whole life to meet you, Alexander said. Like every disaster date and every lonely night was leading me exactly to that table where you were brave enough to sit down and see me. Really see me. Elena set down her coffee and stepped into him, pressing her forehead against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, rapid and strong. I'm scared, she admitted. This is happening so fast. We barely know each other. Then let's get to know each other, Alexander said, wrapping his arms around her. No pressure, no expectations. Just us, learning each other. Okay, Elena said into his shirt. Okay, and they did. Over the next 2 weeks, they learned each other. Alexander learned that Elena sang off-key in the kitchen and cried at dog food commercials. Elena learned that Alexander was actually funny when he wasn't trying to impress anyone, and that he had a scar on his left shoulder from a childhood accident he refused to talk about. They had coffee every morning before Elena's shift. He'd show up at her apartment with pastries from expensive bakeries, and she'd make fun of him for buying bread that cost more than her hourly wage. But he never stopped coming, and she never stopped opening the door. On the 10th day, Alexander took Elena to his apartment for the first time. She stood in the foyer, mouth open, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows and the view of Chicago that looked like a scene from a movie. You live here? She breathed. I exist here, Alexander corrected quietly. I've never really lived here. Elena understood what he meant. The apartment was beautiful but sterile. Perfect furniture arranged in perfect rooms. Nothing personal. Nothing warm. Nothing that said a human being with hopes and dreams and fears actually inhabited this space. It needs color, Elena said decisively. And plants. Definitely plants. I kill plants, Alexander admitted. Then it needs fake plants, Elena said. And photos. Where are your photos? I don't really have anyone to take photos with, Alexander said. And the loneliness in those words physically hurt Elena. She pulled out her phone. Come here. What are you doing? Taking a photo, Elena said firmly. Get over here. Alexander moved beside her, and Elena held up her phone, snapping a selfie of them together. In the photo, Alexander looked surprised and happy, and Elena looked like she was exactly where she belonged. There, Elena said, showing him the screen. Your first photo for this place. Alexander stared at the image, something shifting in his expression. Can you send that to me? Of course. Elena sent the photo, then started walking through his apartment, pointing out where he should add color, warmth, life. And Alexander followed her, not really caring about the suggestions, just grateful to have someone who cared enough to make them. When she finished her tour, they ended up in his kitchen, massive and pristine, and clearly never used for actual cooking. Have you ever made anything in here? Elena asked, running her hand along the marble countertop. I had a nutritionist prepare meals for 2 months, Alexander said. Does that count? Elena laughed. No, that absolutely does not count. She opened his refrigerator, mostly empty except for bottled water and what looked like takeout containers. Okay, this is unacceptable. We're going shopping. Shopping? Grocery shopping, Elena said. I'm going to teach you how to cook something. One thing. So this kitchen isn't just a very expensive decoration. An hour later, they were in Alexander's spotless kitchen, surrounded by ingredients for what Elena promised would be the easiest pasta in the world. I'm pretty sure I'm going to burn this place down, Alexander said, holding a wooden spoon like it might explode. You're a CEO of a software company, Elena said, standing behind him and guiding his hand. If you can code, you can cook. It's all just following instructions. Coding doesn't usually involve fire, Alexander pointed out, but he was laughing. Elena pressed closer, her arms around him as she showed him how to stir the sauce, and Alexander realized that this simple moment in his previously lifeless kitchen was the happiest he'd ever been in this apartment. When the pasta was finally done, slightly overcooked but edible, they sat on his couch with plates balanced on their knees, looking out at the Chicago skyline. This is the best meal I've ever had in this apartment, Alexander said. That's because it's probably the only real meal you've ever had in this apartment, Elena teased. No, Alexander said seriously, setting down his plate and turning to face her. It's because you're here. Elena set down her own plate, her heart hammering. Alexander, I'm falling in love with you, Alexander said. And there was no hesitation, no playing it cool, just raw, honest truth. I know it's too soon. I know we've only known each other 2 weeks, but I can't pretend I don't feel it. And I don't want to pretend. I'm done pretending about things that matter. Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. And it terrifies me, because what if this is just a moment? What if… Alexander kissed her, cutting off the spiral of doubt. And this kiss was different from the one on her doorstep. This kiss was a promise, a commitment, a leap into the unknown together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Elena rested her forehead against his. We're crazy, she said. Completely insane, Alexander agreed. Want to be crazy together? Yes, Elena said. Yes, I really do. That night, Elena stayed over for the first time. They didn't do anything except talk until 3 in the morning and fall asleep tangled together on his couch. But when Elena woke up in Alexander's arms, watching the sunrise paint the city gold, she knew with absolute certainty that her life had just changed forever. On Christmas morning, exactly 2 weeks after they'd met, Alexander showed up at Elena's apartment at 7 a.m. with presents for her entire family. Rosa opened the door in her bathrobe, shocked to find this well-dressed stranger with an armload of wrapped gifts. Mrs. Martinez, Alexander said nervously. I'm Alexander. I'm dating your daughter. And I know this is forward, but I couldn't stand the thought of you all not having presents on Christmas, so He gestured helplessly at the presents. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. Elena, she called into the apartment. Your boyfriend is here, and he's a keeper. That Christmas was the best Elena had experienced since her father died. Alexander fit into her small apartment like he'd always belonged there. He played video games with Sophia, helped Rosa cook, and acted like sitting on their worn couch was better than any luxury he'd ever known. Thank you, Elena whispered to him later that night, as they stood on her small balcony, watching snow start to fall. For what? For seeing me, Elena said. For making me believe that I deserve to be seen. Alexander pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. Thank you for teaching me what living actually means. Before you, I was just existing, going through motions. You showed me the difference. As snow fell on Chicago, Elena Martinez and Alexander Pierce held each other and made silent promises about the future. They didn't know what would come next. They didn't know what challenges they'd face or how they'd navigate the differences in their worlds. But they knew this. Love wasn't about perfect timing or perfect circumstances. It was about finding someone who saw you completely and chose you anyway. It was about being brave enough to let someone in, even when it scared you. It was about 2 broken people deciding to build something whole together. And on that Christmas night, that was more than enough. 6 months later, Elena stood in Bellissimo for a shift that felt different somehow. Alexander had been acting strange all week, distracted, secretive, grinning at his phone like he had the world's best secret. Table 12 needs attention, Marcus said with a knowing smile. Elena walked over, expecting another customer. Instead, Alexander sat there, just like he had that first night. Except this time, the table was covered in flowers, and Alexander was holding a small velvet box. Alexander? Elena's voice shook. What are you doing? 6 months ago, I sat at this table thinking my life was over, Alexander said, standing up. I thought I was unlovable, that I'd never find someone who saw past the money and the success to the person underneath. And then you sat down. Tears were already streaming down Elena's face. Every other server had stopped working. Her manager was watching from the kitchen. Even the customers had gone quiet. You were brave when I couldn't be, Alexander continued, his voice thick with emotion. You saw me when I was invisible. You taught me that strength isn't about never needing anyone. It's about being brave enough to let someone in. And Elena Martinez, I want to let you in for the rest of my life. He dropped to one knee, opening the box to reveal a stunning ring that caught the light and shattered it into rainbows. Marry me, Alexander said. Not because I can give you things or change your life, but because you changed mine. Because I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. Because every day with you is better than the last. And I want 1,000 more days, 1,000 more years. Yes, Elena sobbed. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. The restaurant erupted in applause as Alexander slipped the ring on her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss that tasted like tears and joy and forever. I love you, Elena whispered against his mouth. I love you too, Alexander said. My brave, beautiful Elena. Thank you for being crazy enough to sit down at a stranger's table. Thank you for saving my life. You saved mine too, Elena said. We saved each other. And there, in the same restaurant where they'd met, surrounded by applause and tears and love, Elena Martinez and Alexander Pierce promised each other forever. The waitress who'd been too busy surviving to live. The millionaire who'd had everything except what mattered. Two people who'd been lonely in a crowded world until they found each other. Sometimes the best love stories start with being stood up. Sometimes they start with a kind stranger who refuses to let you suffer alone. Sometimes they start with a Christmas Eve disaster that turns into a Christmas miracle. And sometimes they start with someone brave enough to see past the surface to the person underneath and choosing them, completely and forever. What did you think of Elena and Alexander's story? Did it touch your heart the way it touched mine? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give their journey? Subscribe if you haven't already. And hit that bell so you never miss another story about love, hope, and second chances. Until next time, remember, your person is out there. And sometimes they show up exactly when you've stopped looking.